Hello and welcome to Forward Boldly. I'm your host, Christine Niles. I recently had a discussion with Laura Vander Vos. She's the host of the podcast, Miss Happy Catholic. If you have not subscribed to that podcast, I suggest that you do so. She has a very balanced, very wise, good approach to Catholicism, especially for those of you who move more in traditional Catholic circles. It's a great podcast to listen to. Like I said, very balanced, just a very good approach to the Catholic faith. Again, that's Miss Happy Catholic. And we recently had a discussion about modesty. Modesty appears to be such a controversial topic in so many different ways. So many people weighing in with their own thoughts, ideas, and opinions. And we decided to take a look at exactly what the church teaches on this. Might actually surprise you. The discussion was a lot of fun and a lot of great insights brought out during our discussion. So I'm going to play it for you now, and I hope that you enjoy it.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to my channel. I'm Mrs. Happy Catholic, and this is my guest, Christine Niles. How are you doing, Christine?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me on your show again.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, we had an interview some months ago. It was great. So, I'll put that link in the description below. You can go watch that one too. A little bit of Christine's backstory and how she came to be doing the work that she is in investigative reporting. She works for Church Militant, and I think you wanted to say something about the wonderful dress that you're wearing.
Actually, yeah. So we're doing a show on modesty, and I thought this would be the perfect time to promote a wonderful Catholic modest clothing store. But all the clothes are very elegant. They're very nicely designed. They're not like potato sacks. So I'm actually wearing a dress right now, and it's from bettyhannah.com. So it's the two names together, Betty and Hannah, Hannah. So just go to the website, bettyhannah.com. You can actually see this. It's a very pretty rose-colored suede dress, very comfortable, very light. You can wear it in the summer, but also in the winter because it's warm enough for that as well. But yeah, it's launched by my friend, a good friend of mine, a good Catholic friend who wanted to do both modest clothing, but at the same time also fashionable and elegant and classy. So bettyhannah.com. Thank you for giving me a chance to plug that.
Oh, absolutely. No, that's great. It's good to have resources. And again, yeah, modesty, which we will be talking about, of course, for this show. It doesn't mean frumpy or, hide yourself so nobody notices you and therefore you're modest and you're not a temptation to anyone. I mean,
right.
Yes, God gave us natural beauty. He wants us to be beautiful. So
yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So I came across this show. Christine has a show called Forward Boldly that she does 2 times a week on Tuesdays and Thursdays, 7 p.m. Eastern time, you said? Mm-hmm. You can watch the older episodes later on the website, churchmilitant.com. So please support Christine, check out her work. I found one of her episodes called Modesty Myths, and I was just blown away. I was like, wow, this is awesome that you would look into something like this so much, because it's an issue that I run into a lot in the work that I do with recovering traditionalists. And I just thought it was really mind-blowing and would be good to share a little more broadly. So Christine generously agreed to come on my show and talk about it a little bit. And so if we could, I would just love to dig in. A lot of Catholic circles, especially trad circles, they refer to these modesty guidelines that, the Vatican put out in 1930, and they're, binding universally, and it's like 2 fingers below the pit of your throat, and, short sleeves, at least, preferably covering the elbow, but, short sleeves are permitted for impossible market conditions, and 2 inches below the knee or whatever, it's like, and so you're like, wow, okay. And it's, like, you don't find it in any catechism anywhere or anything like that. If you try to look it up online, you have the darndest time, because you only find like snippets of quotes, and it's attributed to different people sometimes, and directly to the Pope himself, and sometimes different dates. And so Christine was doing research on that, and I would love for you to share what you found about that, Christine.
Absolutely. Well, the first thing I want to make clear is that modesty is absolutely crucial. We take modesty very seriously as Catholics, and you and I have been part of the, traditional Catholic scene for a very long time. We love the traditional liturgy. And this quote that you talk about, this very famous quote, people associate it with something called Mary-like modesty, and part of this modesty crusade that was launched in the 1950s. And it's very well-meaning, very well-intentioned. I followed those standards for a very, very long time, truly believing that these were the standards set by the church universally. And I think a lot of traditional women also follow these standards, truly believing these are the standards set by the church, by the Vatican. And if I deviate from them, I'm actually disobeying. I might be, venturing into sin. And so I need to hew very closely to these particular standards. I started doing some digging, and it turns out that actually the quote has been misattributed to various different people. and that there is actually no historical evidence that Pope Pius XI ever issued it or even endorsed it. Now, the quote does exist, so let's just go straight into it. So let me just read the quote, okay? We recall that a dress cannot be called decent, which is cut deeper than 2 fingers' breadth under the pit of the throat, like this, which does not cover the arms at least to the elbows and does not fall a bit below the knee. Then it says something about transparent dresses as well. And that's usually the only part of the quote that you ever see on numerous websites about Mary-like modesty. But they're leaving out crucial details and crucial context. The first thing they leave out is the clause that directly precedes this quote, that comes right before it. And that clause actually says, in order that uniformity of understanding prevail in all institutions of religious women. So right there, it's limiting the context of those standards of dress to institutions of religious women. But if you actually read the entire document, and we have the original document, you'll see that it limits it even further. It addresses only institutes of religious women, specifically superiors of boarding schools and sponsors of youth in Rome. So it's directed to the city of Rome, superiors of boarding schools and sponsors of youth in Rome. And nowhere has the Pope or anyone ever broadened this rule to make it a universal standard of dress for all women at all times. And anyone who tells you that, they're either ignorant or they're lying. I prefer to believe people aren't lying. I think a lot of people simply don't know. It's been misquoted. Sometimes people say it's the Pope himself who said it. Other people say it was Cardinal Sporetti. The person who actually issued this was Cardinal Basilio Pompili on September 24th, 1928. And you're actually showing that original document from 1928. People get the year wrong too. They say it's 1930. Some people say it's 1932. September 24th, 1928, by Cardinal Basilio Pompili. And again, addressed to a very narrow portion of the Catholic population, again, in the city of Rome. And no evidence that this was broadened to include all women at all times, because that's simply not how the church operates. Now, there is a papal decree on modesty, and that was issued on, let me find it, January 12th, 1930. It was under Pope Pius XI. It was issued under Cardinal Sporetti, who was prefect of the Congregation of the Council. And this is a very wonderful document. People should read it. But what it contains, you will not find that quote in this papal decree. What you will find are general exhortations to modesty, exhortations to pastors to inculcate modesty in the women who come to church, exhortations to parents to inculcate in their children modest dress. But they're general. There's no it must be exactly half an inch, below this part of your body. Nothing like that. It's just more general, right? Because that's how the church expects us to use our God-given brain and common sense and prudence when it comes to dressing modestly. So how you dress at the park, it's not going to be how you dress at Mass. It's not going to be how you dress at a graduation, how you dress at a business party. God has given us freedom, which is the wonderful thing, freedom. We exercise that free will in a way that's prudent, in accord with common sense, in accord with the dictates of modesty.
Awesome. So you can see how this gets confused, because this letter was written to women religious in Italy in 1928, and then the papal decree on modesty comes out in 1930. So they're getting confused, mixed up and crossing over. And yeah, so it's interesting though how that originally happened. I mean, it's interesting. It's like a game of telephone, maybe, or maybe
Yes.
People just kind of glob onto it. It really helps us feel secure when we have something really solid to go by, like a box to check. We're like, oh, I know now that I'm doing everything right, and I don't even have to think about it anymore. And there's something very kind of tempting about that, but it's not really what the church has given us. And I mean, it's not in any official book anywhere, not in the catechism. It's never been in any catechism. And yeah, you can't even find, other than that picture that you sent me, it's from the whole document. It's like a publication of recent pastoral letters or something, and it's in Italian. But yeah, I can put the link to that below so you guys can go look it up, and you can download the text from archive.org and translate it, read it, because it's all there, just like Christine said.
Mm-hmm. And I think if people want to dress according to those standards, absolutely. We're free to dress according to those standards. If you want your children to dress according to those standards, that's fine. The problem comes when you try to impose those standards on every single woman out there, and then you beat them over the head with it, which I've seen a lot happen. People have done it to me, saying, well, you're not dressed this way, and therefore you're sinning, or you're being a temptress, you're being a seductress. Like completely ridiculous things. I've seen women dressed completely and perfectly modestly, but because they run afoul of the exact, the height and length according to that quote. Therefore, they're sinning. And I'm sorry, that is simply false, and it's actually very harmful. It drives people out of the church because it makes them think that God is this sort of like, you must follow this, and if you don't, you're damned.
Yeah, ready to smite you. Yeah, got a big smiting stick. I know. Well, I too for years believed they were binding under sin. So hearing this, it's not like I'm going to just go run around in a bikini now because like you said, you have to use your common sense, and some things still aren't modest, even if we have not got these very specific guidelines to follow in every case. But yeah, definitely. And you had shared some other very interesting quotes in your other video about saints and things, that you had found about modesty that, if you wouldn't mind sharing some of that,
Sure.
They were great.
I think following the saints on exactly what modesty is extremely helpful for those of us who truly desire modesty. And it's interesting to read what the saints say, because to the saints, modesty is not just about outward appearance. That's not what it's about. It's about your decorum. It's about your demeanor. So St. Ambrose, for instance, says, the body should be bedecked naturally and without affectation, with simplicity. St. Francis de Sales, he said, it is an affront to those with whom you associate to be unsuitably dressed, but avoid all conceits, vanities, finery, and affectation. Adhere as far as possible to modesty and simplicity, which doubtless are the best ornaments of beauty and the best atonement for its deficiency. So part of modesty is being suitably dressed for the occasion. So one of the examples I gave is, you could, let's say your husband is going to a very important business function, okay, and you're his wife. You could actually be dressed immodestly if you go dressed head to toe, okay, covered, but completely frumpy, all right, not a lick of makeup on, nothing, because you're not suitably dressed for the occasion. It's disrespectful to your husband. It's embarrassing to the other guests there, and it shows, according to St. Francis, a lack of modesty. So modesty is not just about how many inches of my flesh do I cover. It's about everything. It's about your attitude. It's about your demeanor. It's about understanding how to dress for this occasion as opposed to that occasion, showing respect for yourself as well as showing respect for other people, which is why, one of this claim that I've come across with some of the more extreme fringe of Catholics where makeup is a sin. First of all, the church has never said that. And in some cases, makeup is absolutely appropriate. Like, for instance, what I said, going to an important function, and it's important for your husband's job, and you have to dress certainly appropriately. Obviously, you don't want to overdo it. You always have to find the right balance. You don't, just like the saint said, you don't want affectation. You don't want to be ostentatious and wear all sorts of jewelry and be all gaudy and all that, some gobs and gobs of makeup. You just want to look simple and pleasing to the eye. I mean, how effective would I be on Forward Boldly, which ultimately it's about evangelization. It's about trying to reach out to souls and draw them to the beauties of the Catholic faith. And I try to reach out to a broad mass of people. It's not just Catholics. I'm not just preaching to the choir. I'm talking to Protestants, Jews, all sorts of people. How effective would it be if I just got on there and didn't bother to comb my hair and put zero makeup on, didn't brush my teeth? You know what I mean? I mean, you try to present the truth in as attractive, but, unaffected and authentic way as possible. And that really is what modesty is about. It's the whole package.
That's awesome. So primarily it's an interior disposition that's manifested in your external dress.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely. And that's what all the saints say. Let me just read on St. Thomas Aquinas. He says about women, if they adorn themselves with the intention of provoking others to lust, they sin mortally. Whereas if they do so from frivolity or from vanity for the sake of ostentation, it is not always mortal, but sometimes venial. The same applies to men in this respect. So I think that's very important as well, is men are just as beholden to modesty as women. Men can't go around walking shirtless in super tight or short shorts, especially if they're like really ripped, and then expect women to go covered from head to foot. I mean, it applies to both men and women.
That's a great point. Yes, again, it's usually posited as something that's women's responsibility, and men don't really enter into it. But if you're dressing appropriately for the occasion, then that would apply to everyone, and that's really interesting.
And I think too, it's important to remember too as well that dress can change from culture to culture and from generation to generation. That's not to say that going topless in this culture is perfectly fine. I mean, I think it's if that's something you're doing in a particular culture, there's nothing wrong with introducing, let's clothe ourselves, but so that I'm not saying it's all completely subjective, but there is precedent, not just according to the saints, but also in the tradition of the church, for instance, women to be dressed a certain way in different eras that weren't necessarily considered immodest. And even St. Francis de Sales addressed this, where he was talking about uncovering the breast. He didn't mean like showing the full breast, but I think what he meant was in certain ages and times, like for instance in, I believe it was like 18th century, 17th century France and parts of Europe, they did wear low-cut bodices. You could see that Queen Marie Antoinette did. Empress Zita, who is now a blessed in heaven, they wore low-cut bodices because that was just part of their royal dress, essentially. And no one thought it was immodest. I'm not saying go dress that way now. I think maybe in our culture now it would be considered immodest. But I'm just saying in that culture at that time, it was not considered immodest. So that just goes to show there's no one set standard that applies to all times, to all places, to all women.
Right. I'm sorry, Christine, did you read that quote from St. Francis where he talks about exposing the breast?
I could if you want me to.
That would be great. You read it in your other one. I thought it was really interesting. Yeah.
Sure. So this is what he says. If a woman thinks that some people in general will be scandalized by her, but she doesn't think that someone in particular will be scandalized by her, and she does not intend their lustfulness, nor would she be pleased by their lustfulness, then she is not bound to abstain from ornamentation, even superfluous ornamentation such as makeup or uncovering her breasts if that is the local custom. And it would not be a mortal sin for her to do these things. However, it is a mortal sin if the uncovering of the breasts or the ornamentation were shameful in itself and were directed toward provoking lust. So again, this is not just about how many square inches of my flesh do I cover. This is about my internal disposition, my intentions, my attitude.
Wow. That is really interesting. I found a quote. There was an article on ascensionpress.com by, I think it's Dr. Andrew Swafford, and he's sort of weaving in some quotes from St. John Paul II talking about modesty. So they're kind of interspersed in this paragraph, but I'll just read this. He says, Wojtyła writes, "What is shameless in dress is that which clearly contributes to a deliberate obscuring of the most essential value of the person by the sexual values," unquote. That is when someone deliberately seeks to accentuate their sexual values in a way that overshadows their true dignity as persons. In terms of concrete specifics, Wojtyła points to the consideration of function for an outfit. For example, quote, "during physical labor in hot weather while bathing or at the doctor," unquote, "if the clothing essentially serves the function, then it's not immodest." Quote, "when a person uses dress like that within the framework of its objective function, then we cannot see shamelessness in this," unquote. But Wojtyła then follows, noting that to employ such dress outside the context of its specific function does become immodest, for the dress no longer serves the function, but is obviously done for some other reason, presumably to get attention, which the saints were saying, don't dress, for affectation or to get attention. And then this was interesting too, this note that he adds, "A common place where people struggle with modesty is at the gym. On the one hand, one might say that workout clothing, often tight and revealing, serves the function of working out. And to some extent, this is true. But here's the question I would pose. Would you wear the same outfit if there were no mirrors around, say at a local fitness center, or if you thought no one would see you? If the answer is no, then the outfit is not just about function." Again, the way in which Wojtyła treats pornography is instructive here. This tendency, he says, aims at evoking in the recipient a conviction that the sexual value is the only essential value of the person, unquote. But if we are true to ourselves and how God made us, then we will seek to appreciate our sexual values in a way that subordinates them to our true dignity as persons. So it's not too obscure that we do have a sexual value. because of how we're created, but that it should not supplant our dignity as persons. And that's what our dress should reflect, the dignity first, and always keeping that at the center.
Absolutely. And I think for those of us who want to restore modesty in the world and encourage other women to dress modestly, I really think we have to help people, especially women, recapture an understanding of their dignity in Christ, because so many of us in the world have completely lost that understanding of our dignity. And we see it today. We see it in the hookup culture. We see it in the way that, like I said, on college campuses, girls are hooking up just as much as guys are. And that's a big shift from how it used to be just 50 years ago. And it really stems from a lack of understanding of our dignity as created in the image of God and deeply loved by God, which is why kind of going around looking down on people, judging them because they're dressed a certain way, that's never going to work. That's not going to change hearts. But if you let women know, especially young girls, because they need to learn this, that they have so much dignity by God who loves them intensely. And because they have that dignity, they don't want to lower themselves. They don't want to debase themselves by their actions, by bad people that they hang out with, by hooking up or engaging in behaviors that would really completely debase themselves. You want to teach them you are worth just immeasurable. It's immeasurable what you're worth in the eyes of God. And He loves you deeply, and you're created to be a future citizen of heaven, to be united to God in all eternity in a union of love, incredible love. And He wants better for you than this. And so once you start understanding that and really internalizing that, then not only do you start acting that way, you also start dressing that way, because you realize, I don't want men to look at me like I'm just a sexual object, because I know that I'm more than that. I know that I have dignity. I have immeasurable worth. And therefore, I want men to look at me with respect. So I'm going to dress in a way that is respectful of myself and respectful of others. And I think as Catholics, we really do need to help evangelize the world by reminding them and restoring to them the understanding of God's love, really.
I think you're absolutely right. And beauty is, I've heard it put that truth is the narrow door through which people enter the church, but beauty is the wider door. And most people will come in because of experiencing beauty and goodness in that way. And so it's not hiding that because we're afraid of ourselves as women, our sexual identity, or, that we could be a stumbling block or something. And so feeling like we have to not wear makeup, not do our hair, not dress nicely or things, and thinking that that's somehow going to protect men in a way. It's but it's depriving the world of something that God gave you as a gift to share, of being beautiful. But that doesn't mean you have to sacrifice modesty in order to be beautiful. And there's a book out there called Worthy of Wearing. I'm not thinking of the author's name right now, but she makes a good point about that. And, I recommend that book just for some further reflection, because it's good to think about yourself and how you were made to be, and not depriving people of that goodness and that beauty, because it can really draw people's attention in a positive way, not hey, look at me, but just being edified by it, because it's like having a good, satisfying meal, and you feel good and your body is fed and full of nutrition, and you're able to go do what you need to do. It's you're providing that in a small way to the world when you go out among people and you're sharing something good that should be there, because evil, is the absence of good. So putting a positive good out there is filling the world the way that God intended us to. It's doing His work. Yes.
And I'm always suspicious of the individuals who expect women to dress, cover from head to toe. And if you're not, then you're sinning. I'm always suspicious of those people, because I think either men or women, because what I think is, okay, you guys, you have some issues, all right? You probably have some issues. You probably struggle in that area. And so because you struggle with it, you probably assume everybody else struggles with it. And therefore, if women aren't completely dressed, completely covered in every single way, it's going to cause you to struggle. And you just kind of assume that everybody has that struggle, because I have come across people like that before. And many times my instincts are right, because I found out from those people I used to live a really, really, really promiscuous life. And now they're swinging, all the way to the other side of the pendulum, to the other extreme, where they think they have to be completely covered, and they still struggle very much with this particular issue. Whereas the healthy people without any sort of sexual hangups, they can look at a woman, admire her beauty, but not devolve her to just a sexual object that needs to be completely covered up all the time, or else she's just going to present this horrible temptation.
Right.
So,
Yeah, you just hit on it, because the thing is, the reality is, and for that person who thinks the woman has to be covered all the time, their interior view has not been redeemed. So they still consider her a sexual object.
Right.
And they haven't been able to get past that. So it's like, just cover up so I don't have to be confronted with that and I don't have to deal with it. But that is not a burden that we can put on other people. When it's that extreme, that's something that you need healing in your own heart, and that God can provide if you ask him. But yeah, it's
Absolutely.
like, don't project that onto the culture, because obviously we're running into, even very traditional circles where people are trying to do everything right. And then these abuse issues crop up, even among the clergy, like, you've covered and many times. It's like, well, where is that coming from? There's obviously something that has not been redeemed, has not been processed. And so it's coming out, it's repressed instead of healed. And so then it comes out in these aberrations and it's hurting people. And so it's not working. We need more. And that's, I think, where St. John Paul II's Theology of the Body is the missing key to that, and helping to redeem our understanding of our natures and our bodies so that we can appreciate them for what God intended them to be, and not in a twisted way.
Correct. And I know Theology of the Body gets a really bad rap, especially from the more traditional circles. But I have to tell you that when I first discovered Theology of the Body, when I was kind of coming back to the faith in law school, it absolutely transformed my understanding of human sexuality and just human beings and how we relate to one another in a good way. In a good way. Now, I do agree that there are certain popular interpretations of Theology of the Body that kind of overly sexualize things. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about what John Paul II wrote himself. And I encourage people to go back and read what he himself wrote, because, the entire, the sexual marital intimacy, instead of being a shameful thing, it's actually such a beautiful thing, because it's a gift of yourself to your spouse. It's a self-donation, as the Pope said. And you are at your most vulnerable in that moment, because you're completely giving yourself to the other in every single way possible. I mean, it's not just your body, but it's emotionally, it's psychologically, spiritually, everything. And you're most intimate, you're most vulnerable. And it's a beautiful thing when it happens in the right context, and it's a horrible thing when it happens in the wrong context. But I would encourage Catholics out there to give Theology of the Body a chance. Again, read the original writings of Pope John Paul II, not necessarily the popularized versions of it.
Right. And in English, there's a volume called Man and Woman, He Created Them, that has a whole compilation of his general audiences on Theology of the Body in one book. So you can read that in English. And yeah, it's even for celibate people to read and understand their own being and why God created us the way he did, because our Lord was celibate, but he had gender. I mean, it's like, it's not incidental. It's very purposeful, and it's very full of meaning. And so, yeah, you're really missing out if you don't dip into that. And I've heard the criticism that, well, Theology of the Body doesn't teach anything that the church didn't always teach. And it's like, technically, yeah, it's not like it's new teaching that just came out of nowhere, but it's a development of doctrine that was sorely needed right now, especially after the sexual revolution. And I mean, Puritanism needed to be thrown off, but not in that way. This is the right way. This is the reordering of things as God made them to be. So, yeah.
Correct. And just going back to this, well, it's not anything that the church hasn't taught before. Of course, it's in line with what the church has always taught, but that doesn't mean it doesn't reveal a new facet, right? So, for instance, back in the 1600s, when the Sacred Heart devotion first came out, I'm sure there were probably Catholics who were like, well, that doesn't say anything different from what the church has always taught. Well, sure, but it reveals a new facet, a new understanding of God's love and his mercy through the Sacred Heart devotion. Just like, I argue today, the Divine Mercy devotion. A lot of people are like, oh, well, that's new and that doesn't, well, okay. Yeah, but it shows a new facet, right? It builds upon the Sacred Heart devotion, and it's absolutely beautiful. And it shows a new facet of God's love and his mercy in ways that we might not have understood before. So all of these things just sort of build on the church's teachings and make them more full, So.
Right. Oh, that's awesome, Christine. I really appreciate you taking the time to come on. And I wondered if there's any other quotes or points that you wanted to share before we wrap it up, because I know you need to get going.
Well, I think you make a great point that we're not Puritans. Catholics are not Puritans. And we have to really be careful about that, because there can be this Jansenist strain in Catholicism, because it goes back to what you were saying before, this temptation to, here's this neat little box of these are the rules. And as long as I stay in this little box and I follow all these rules, that I'm safe. And In one sense, that's true. We have to follow God's commands, all of that. But God has also given us free will. He's given us a brain. He's given us common sense. He's given us wisdom and prudence in order to apply the teachings of the church in various situations. God expects us to use that brain and that common sense. That's how you grow. That's how you mature. It's how you become, an adult, essentially. So it's really important that we not fall into this trap, this temptation of, as long as I just follow these rules laid out for me, I'm good. Because that's not true. What God cares about the most is your heart, the state of your soul and the state of your heart especially. So if you're dressing the part, but your heart and your thoughts are not redeemed, that's a more fundamental problem that you need to get to the root of. Have God deal with that, heal the interior and redeem the interior, because that really is the heart of modesty.
Oh, that's great. No, it's such an excellent point that we got to really keep in mind. Again, so many things, it's tempting to make them external about observance.
Yes.
And, seeing that these things are met, these criteria. But again, it's like, where's the heart of it? We should be set free from the law by truly loving. If perfect love instructs you so that you would always do what's right without having to think like that about checking boxes. You would always be like, what is the most loving thing to do for my neighbor, for myself, loving God? And you would always do the right thing. It makes it so simple. That's why Jesus didn't reiterate the 10 commandments. He told us the 2 commandments, and they were all about love, loving God,
Yes.
Loving your neighbor. So
Absolutely. And St. Augustine said, love God and do what you will. Now, that doesn't mean be, subjectivism and go and sin. That's not what it means. So don't anybody come and write me and say, Christine, St. Augustine, love God and do what you will, meaning love is the very first thing. It's the fundamental thing. It's the foundational thing. As long as you are truly loving God, then that will guide your actions and your decisions in everything else.
Oh, that's so cool. One thing that popped into my mind I want to make sure I mention is I think it might have been in that papal decree concerning modesty where they talked about pastors, and their responsibility to make sure that modesty is taught and things. I know there are some traditional parishes where they'll even post these modesty guidelines that we just discussed, on the doors or in the bulletin or something, and they'll turn people away if they don't come dressed like that, and they won't let them come into the church or they won't let them receive communion. And sometimes the laity even take it upon themselves to tell people, oh, you can't come in, you can't go to communion. But it's actually never given to the laity to do that. It's only to the pastors that in grave situations of immodesty that they would have to say something like that to someone or deny them communion. But it's not even they're not giving specific rules and saying if this dress is an inch shorter than this, then you can't do it. It's grave situations. And so just so that people don't think it's incumbent on your conscience to be going around telling people they're not doing things right and that you better not come into church or something, because I know that can happen with good intentions, but it's actually for the pastors to do. So
yeah, absolutely. And it's funny. After I aired my Modesty Myths episode, I actually got a note from an FSSP priest who I'm not going to name, but he said it was a great episode. He really liked it, and he said he's very aware of the I think he called them some of the zany ladies in his parish who take it upon themselves to go around and scold everybody else about what they're wearing. So,
oh no,
yeah,
oh no, yeah, no. I had a conversation with another FSSP priest one time where he was telling me about the modesty guidelines and why they were enforced universally, and he was of the impression that even in Papua New Guinea, these women walking around without a shirt on or something, that's immodest for them, just like it would be for us. But now with all the other context of the reading and things that I've done since and finding your episode, and I'm just processing that and I'm going, in these other cultures, that's not immodest for them. It's not provocative. Other things are, and they avoid those things because in Africa, they're topless, but their thighs are covered because to them, that's understood as being a provocative part of the body. So they keep it covered. And so it's weird to us because yes, in Western culture, you made a point in your Modesty Myths, we don't, to bare our chests now is considered immodest because of pornography and the way that people, it's done to sexualize people. And so when you do that, at least past a certain point, then you are drawing attention and it's sending the wrong message in our culture. But that's not true in every culture in every country. And I don't remember if it was, I want to say it was Pope Pius IX was writing to a country that like a third world country that had recently been evangelized, and they were writing to the Pope saying it's customary for our women to wear pants. Is that, acceptable, or do they need to dress like Western women in order to be considered modest in the eyes of the church? And he wrote back to them and he said, what you're doing is fine as long as it is considered modest in your culture. Let them wear pants. Basically, I have the exact quote somewhere. I'll find it and I'll put it in the description. But yeah, that kind of raises people's eyebrows too. They're like, pants? Oh my gosh, Yes. So anyway, just there's hope. Well, there's options, and in our day and age, pants are now not just men's dress; they are also women's dress. So
right, and they have been for a very long time. Now, I'm someone who prefers to wear dresses. I don't really wear pants very much, but at the same time, I'm not part of that pants are always a sin. That's ridiculous. That's completely ridiculous. And I do want to make a distinction here. You were talking about individuals in Papua New Guinea who go around topless. We can't judge them as immodest because clearly, like you said, it's part of their culture and they don't think that that's immodest. And so they're not going around, necessarily lusting and violating their norms of immodesty. So it's not for us to sit here and pass judgment upon them as if, they're being so immodest. Having said that, I have no problem, for instance, with missionaries coming there and teaching them to cover up. I think actually it would be a good thing to teach people to dress modestly and to cover up. I don't have a problem with that. And obviously, if they were to, let's say, come and visit the Western world, or go to church or go to the Vatican, they have to cover up because that's suitable to us, and it would be immodest for them not to. But yeah, I think you make some great points that it depends on the culture, and we have to be sensitive to that. And the pants thing as well. I remember getting into a big debate with a Catholic online, a traditional Catholic online, about how would Mary dress today? And I just said, look, I just think Mary would dress like a normal woman, just a normal girl. She wouldn't stand out in any way. Obviously, she wouldn't go around dressed like a Middle Eastern woman from 2,000 years ago, with flowing, that would be ridiculous because then that's not modest. She'd be standing out, okay? It would be ostentatious. She would simply fit in and look like a normal girl. If that means in some cases wearing pants, yeah, but she would do it tastefully and modestly. Nothing super tight or, nothing like that. And this lady she went off on me. She was like, no way. She would never wear pants. You're crazy. That's horrible. All that stuff. And I'm like, I just think she would fit in. She would dress tastefully. She would dress modestly. She wouldn't do anything to stand out. Maybe she'd be wearing a dress, but in some cases, maybe pants. Anyway, it's such a heated topic. It's amazing.
True. But again, yeah, the Mary-like modesty, it's like, well, how are we interpreting that? And we don't want to get too carried away with our own interpretations of things, even great concepts, because we can go even farther than the church would have us go. And the church has not defined that herself. So, you can reference private revelation or whatever, but again, private revelation is not required for salvation. It's not something you even have to believe ever happened, even if the church approves it. So it can be very edifying and beneficial to you if you do decide to, go that route, but not mandatory. And so, yes, please don't put burdens on yourself or on other people that God did not make us to bear.
Exactly.
It's awesome. Exactly. I thank you so much, Christine, for taking the time to do this video. And I really appreciate it. And I know it's going to help people get some information out there and clarify things. So
thank you. And I just want to once again plug my friend's clothing store, bettyhanna.com. You'll find some beautiful, elegant, classy, modest dresses there.
Awesome. All right. Well, God bless you, Christine. And do everyone go to churchmilitant.com and check out Christine's work and her Forward Boldly series and support her there if you can. She's doing awesome work. And thank you again. God bless you.
God bless you.